Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going over all the new Final Fantasy spoilers that were spoiled today, new combos and synergies. This set is going to be legal in standard, so we are going to be focusing on standard combos and synergies here and potentially what's going to be coming out. I think the set isn't going to come out for another few months at least, but we got a bunch of spoilers today, so I thought we'd go over them and see what we got. Some sweet new combos that I'm excited to build around. The first one is the Jumbo Cactuar, I believe. I'll pronounce this. I'm going to pronounce a lot of these cards wrong, probably. It's 7 mana for a 1/7 plant, and it has 10,000 needles. Whenever it attacks, it gets basically gets a 10,000 power. So that's pretty good. Plus 9,999 power to give it exactly 10,000 needles. So this is a lethal attack. If you aren't aware, you only start with 20 life in Magic. So um, this is pretty good if you can find a way to give it haste, because you want to attack with it right away to get the bonus, right? And trample. If you have a combination of haste and trample, this card is really good. I think there's lots of different ways you could use this. One, maybe the Sword of Vengeance, if you equip that onto it, bring it into play with Surak and Goreclaw, which gives other creatures trample. It also gives it haste. There's lots of different ways you could sneak this into play potentially with other cards, and maybe you fling it with like Calicel swords burned together. You know, if they just chump block it, or you make it unblockable with Escape Tunnel. So let me know in the comments below any fun ways to use the Jumbo Cactuar. Definitely a pretty strong card. I think it's got some like real potential, because it is just like a one hit kill, no matter how much life your opponent has gained, which is cool. Um, Definitely a unique card, and I think it's got a lot of combo potential. Maybe just mostly jank combo, but I don't know. I don't. It's kind of scary that this card exists as well. So we'll see. I'm sure there's tons of other combos. Yeah, let me know in the comments below what you're thinking about with this card, this plant, giant plant. But yeah, definitely a fun one, and I'm looking forward to brewing a bunch of combo decks with this guy. Okay, next up we've got Sin, Spira's Punishment, which is a 7 mana 7/7 flying, a legendary Leviathan avatar, and says when it enters or attacks, exile a permanent card from your graveyard at random, then create a tapped token that's a copy of the card. If the exile card's a land card, you get to repeat the process. So it kind of reminded me of Lumra in that regard. Like if you just have a bunch of lands in your graveyard, you get to return all of them essentially. I mean, you exile them and then they get returned into play tapped. So kind of like Lumra if you wanted like an additional Lumra effect, but this also can do any single permanent card in your graveyard and bring it back, which is pretty powerful. It makes it a pretty powerful reanimation target, because let's say you have two big cards you want to bring back in your graveyard, this and an Atraxa in your graveyard, for example, something like that. If you just zombify this, then you would also return the Atraxa. It would come back into play as a token tapped, but you get its come to play ability. You'd basically get two cards back for the price of just zombifying one. It's pretty cool with like I was trying to see if there's like cards that can copy it and make it not legendary again. The Apprentice's Folly in standard, it makes a copy of something, makes it not legendary, and it gives it haste. It's only a reflection in it, so it'll only last a couple turns. But if you had both the Folly and the Sin Spire's Punishment in your graveyard, you return the Sin, um, and then it triggers, returns the Folly, makes a copy of it, then that would return something else from your graveyard. If you had any other permanents from your graveyard, it would return those, and then it would give it haste to get attack right away, and trigger again, return something else. That could be a huge turn, something pretty powerful that you could do with this card. I'm sure there's also other interesting combos. I mean, if you just bring anything else back that gets it haste, you get to get its trigger twice because it triggers when it attacks too. So I think this definitely has some powerful potential. Some combos pretty good in a reanimation shell, maybe even in older formats. This could be a pretty good reanimation target if you have, say, two cards that you want to reanimate. You kind of get them both back. So definitely interesting and cool, powerful, giant new creature that we get to play with. So on to the next one, which is Cloud, the sort of main character, I believe, of Final Fantasy. I played some Final Fantasy back in the day, Final Fantasy VII in particular, um, but I'm not like super in touch with all the lore, so you might have to help me out in the comments if I get any of the lore wrong or whatever. But anyways, Cloud, I believe, is one of the main characters throughout most of the series. Um, it's a 5 mana 4/4. It says during your turn, as long as it's equipped, it has double strike and indestructible. And equip abilities you activate that target it cost 2 less to activate. Now that's pretty powerful, actually. These effects. It is kind of expensive. 5 mana for this effect. This kind of card is expensive. Maybe this is just kind of more casual jank potential, but you could definitely like make some sort of Voltron equipment deck with this. If you just played a bunch of stuff that gives it like haste, like the Hero's Heirloom is pretty sweet because it would give it trample and haste, and then when it's equipped, it gets double strike and indestructible, which is kind of nice. Um, so they can't block it with anything or kill it in combat or anything like that. But just giving it haste is pretty good. So if you just like played out these cheap equipments early in the game, then you play this on turn 5, equip it up with everything, attack with a huge double striker with haste, could win you the game. We have all the swords in standard that are legal now too. That really don't see any play because they're just not good enough. But making those all equipped for free is pretty good. So like the Sword of Forge and Frontier, for example, having those equipped for free onto this guy is pretty good, and a huge double striker. So I don't know, maybe some potential. We'll have to see, I guess, what other equipments we get in the meantime too. But there's a decent amount that give it haste right away, which is pretty enticing, perhaps, to play this in some sort of combo deck like that. All right. Next up, we have got the Emet-Selch. Don't know how to pronounce this exactly, but yeah, that's my best. 3 mana for a 2/4 with vigilance. When it enters or attacks, draw a card and then discard a card. So loot effect, and then to begin upkeep, if you have 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you can transform it. So we got double faced creatures, which is kind of cool. Transforms into Hades. Sorceress of Eld, and it's a 6/6 vigilance. Says during your turn, you can play cards from your graveyard. Very powerful. And if a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, you exile it instead. So definitely a powerful effect if you get to flip this thing, and pretty decent on the front side too. It's just like a looter with decent stats. Having 4 toughness is pretty good. It can maybe block decently. Vigilance is nice, so when you attack with it, you can still block with it. So basically, just kind of a looter that also can play defense potentially, and then has this really big upside if you do fill up your graveyard. So there are ways to fill up your graveyard pretty quickly in standard with like Founding of the Third Path, for example. Self mill strategies would probably want this card. It's pretty nice with like reanimation strategies as well. For example, like maybe with the card we were talking about before, Sin Punishment could be a good way to kind of set up a reanimation strategy there. But um, Reenact the Crime is pretty nice with this because it's a 0 mana way of looting, which is good with Reenact the Crime. So you can play this on 3 attack, and then during combat or whatever, after you loot this a second time, you can just reenact whatever you looted. So there's some interesting potential there. Kind of probably more of just like a piece, an enabling piece, than actual um, something to build around, but definitely a helpful piece too. Kind of reminds me of the new Merfolk that we got that draws 2 and discards 2 and has some bonus threshold. The new Kiora, so kind of similar to that, and that card is pretty good and sees some play. So I think it's a definitely a card to keep an eye on. It's mythic and pretty powerful, I think. Okay, next up we've got Cecil, the Dark Knight. This card's pretty cool. 1 mana for a 2/3. Legendary Human Knight. Got Death Touch, Darkness. Whenever it deals damage, any damage too. So if you like, somehow it does non-combat damage, this would trigger. You lose that much life, and then if your life total is less than or equal to half your starting life total, so you have to be at 10 or less life, then you flip it over, and it becomes a 4/4. Very good for 1 mana with lifelink. So you can kind of get your life back potentially. If you lost a bunch from it, then you can get a 4/4, get your life back. And when it attacks, other attacking creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So this card is pretty sweet, I think, pretty powerful. I mean, if you just think about it against an aggressive deck, it's kind of cool because say your opponent is attacking you, getting you down to low life, then you attack with this, or deal any damage. So it also works if you block with it, for example, if you block a creature, and then your life total is down to 10 or less, it would flip over to 4/4 life link just for 1 mana. So it's pretty good against aggressive decks, right? So just as a standalone card, I think it's pretty powerful. Also, a pretty aggressive card itself against control decks. So cards that are good against control and aggro are definitely good cards. And so, there's some interesting synergies too in standard. The last ride is something that you kind of like want your life total to go down. This going to kind of help you reduce your life total. Death Shadow strategies in older formats, something like that. It has Death Touch, so I made that Fing the Fing Bearer deck, and this card would probably go in that deck for sure, with all the Death Touch tribal kind of stuff going on. So definitely a cool card. For Fin decks, and Moon Mist in older formats is kind of cute, perhaps. As we're thinking about double faced cards, we've already seen 2 of them so far. That there it comes back. That you can kind of think about Moon Mist. I don't know if there's other humans that would want to be transformed with that card, but that is another interesting synergy. Yeah, let me know. This card seems pretty strong. Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm over evaluating, under evaluating, but it seems like a pretty good one. Okay, next up, oops, thought I went 2. No, we went 1 over. Okay, next up we've got the Moogle Merchant, which is a 1 mana 1/2 with lifelink. It is a Moogle legend. I don't know how to pronounce his first name, so I'm not even gonna try. 2 mana to tap. Target opponent gains control of another target permanent you control, and if they do, you draw a card. So definitely a way to donate things. It is a way to draw extra cards, but you probably, like if you had maybe like little tokens laying around, donate those. Um, Draw some cards. But I think the most cool way, obviously, for donate cards is you want to find something that really is going to harm your opponent or just win you the game straight up, like Demonic Pact, Archfiend to the Dross to a lesser extent. You donate it, you just win the game, or make your opponent lose the game, I should say. Greed's Gambit is also a nice one that has like a huge drawback on it that you would want to donate to your opponent. So maybe you could splash white into that deck. There's the red card that makes you donate, so you could maybe play 3 colors in that sort of list with this guy. Some potential, kind of an interesting. I mean, just a 1/2 lifelink is somewhat useful sometimes, gain a little bit of extra life, and his ability could be used to just draw some cards too earlier in the game as well. So kind of an interesting card for sure, and has some cool combo potential. All right, and next up we've got our Chocobo. I remember the Chocobos. This is a baby Chocobo, a 1 mana 0/1 bird with landfall. Whenever land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So we got to already have like a bunch of landfall +1/+1 counter synergies in standard with Wristed Bill. We just got the Mossborn Hydra from Foundations. Kind of an interesting theme going on, and this kind of completes like the 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop now for that kind of, I don't know, theme, anyways. And there's a bunch of +1/+1 counter synergies. The Botanical Brawler, for example, once +1/+1 counters will be put on things every turn. There's a new card, Point the Way, which is kind of interesting. Couldn't really think of any great ways to use it in standard, but this could be interesting synergy. If you play Chocobo on 1, Point the Way on 2, start your engines. Play a land, put a +1/+1 counter, hit for 1. Engines go up to 2, and then when you get to 4 mana, um, then you can get 4 lands if you have max speed. So that could be pretty powerful, maybe in that sort of aggressive landfall deck. Something to think about. Yeah, a lot of +1/+1 synergies. There's other cards that like add when it says like whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on a creature, you put an additional one of those. So maybe in some sort of shell like that. But yeah, I think this card's powerful. Obviously in older formats too, like when you have fetch lands, this card's pretty sweet. So that could be useful, just to kind of, you know, could basically be a Curd Ape on turn 2 if you play this on turn 1, and you go fetch land. There are fetch lands that come to play tapped in standard, and maybe that's worth it too if you kind of have enough landfall synergies. So yeah, I could definitely see this guy seeing some constructive play with all the kind of cool synergies it has going on, and I think it's a pretty powerful card overall. 1 mana that has the potential to turn into, greater, like it's not too hard to get this guy bigger than a Curd Ape, right? If you just play 3 lands, so seems like it could be pretty good. Okay, next up, we've got the oh yes, the side quest. It's enchantment. 3 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's an artifact or creature, you can reveal it, put it into your hand, and if you put a card Enter your hand this way. You create food and transform it. Flips over to a land that taps for white mana, and 3 to sacrifice an artifact. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature you control, or +1 on each creature you control. So a lot of flavor wins here. You catch the fish. You get an extra card. You get a food token from the fish. You can sacrifice the fish so your whole party can eat the fish to boost their power and toughness. Good flavor. Literally flavor from the fish, perhaps. But interesting card. I don't know how competitive it is. It does do quite a bit, though. Like if you are able to flip the creature or artifact, you kind of basically get an extra card draw, and then you get a food token, and you also get an extra land. It can be land ramp. You could play this on turn 2, for example, with Landware Elves. And maybe you're just playing a bunch of creatures. So there's some luck involved in this and hitting the creature or land. Also, a good flavor with the fish. You just don't know when you're going to catch it. All right, so this card is just hitting flavor on all levels. I love this, but how competitive? I don't know exactly. Could be good in maybe that Land Elf Overlord kind of deck. It does ramp you a bit, which can be useful to get to hardcast the overlords, things like that. And then if you're going wide, putting +1/+1 kind of everything could be good. There are food synergies as well. We'll see. Definitely a really cool card, um, and happy to see it. All right, let's go to the next one. Summon Shiva. So I think they're kind of going to have a bunch of these sort of saga creatures, which are interesting. This one's a 5 mana, 4/5. And sagas, they come into play with 1 lore counter, and then during your draw step, you put another counter on it, and then after the third one, you sacrifice it. So the creature won't actually stay around that long, but you will get the effects of whatever the saga is. So this one is tap a creature and put a stun counter on it. So the first turn it comes to play, then the second turn you do that again, and then on the third turn you have this out. You draw a card for each tap creature your opponent controls. So kind of decent card. It feels more like a limited power level card to me, but if they do have more of these, which I think the set will have, different types of these creatures that are also sagas. There's some ways to use sagas that are interesting. You can proliferate to add counters to them, and there's actually cards that can remove counters from creatures. This old card, I can't remember the Inquiry Dominus, how to pronounce that one either, can actually remove counters from creatures, so you can kind of keep the creature around longer if you have effects that remove counters from it and get the um, continually tap down your opponent's creatures every turn. So that could be interesting to think about and when we, eventually they will spoil more of these cards as the set gets closer to coming out, but something to keep in mind, I guess, with these saga creatures as well. There are enchantments which can synergize with a bunch of stuff like in Duskmourn, things like that. So definitely interesting, kind of cool new card type that they are releasing here. And then lastly, a bunch of different creatures that I didn't really know if they were any good. They seem alright. Couldn't think of anything cool combo-y really to do with them. Let me know in the comments below if you can, of course. Tonberry is a 1 mana 2/1 a salamander horror. It enters tapped with a stun counter on it, but it also has First Strike and Death Touch during your turn, which is quite the combination of abilities because it's pretty hard or almost impossible to block it unless the opposing creature also has First Strike. Then they can trade. But First Strike and Death Touch kills basically everything. But coming to play with tapped and a stun counter means it basically does nothing the turn that you play it or the turn after. So kind of weak in that regard. But again, having First Strike and Death Touch and 2 power for 1 mana is powerful too. So the upside is there, the downside is there. Hard to say if it's actually worth it, but maybe in an aggressive deck this could be good, where you're just trying to get in as much damage over time as possible. Garland and Knight of Cornelia also flips to Chaos. The Endless, I believe this was like the first boss in Final Fantasy. And then it says if you cast a non-creature spell, you surveil 1. So any non-creature spell is pretty good. If you have like a way to bounce an artifact or something like that, that could be useful. But the most important part, I think, of this card is the 7 mana, total of 7 mana to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield transformed as a 5/5 flyer, and when it dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So Could be good in a graveyard synergy deck if you just mill this into your graveyard. Can be a late game threat, something like that. It is a demon, and when it flips over, which can matter for some demon synergies. Interesting card for sure. And then Sephiroth, the Plains Heir, is a 6 mana 4/4 with Vigilance Legend. And when it enters, creatures your opponent's control get -2/-2. Whenever a creature your opponent control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So interesting effect. We already have like Masker Worm, which kind of does the same thing, and like drains your opponent um, every time a creature dies. So not sure if this card will see any play. I mean, Masker Worm doesn't really see any play. So yeah, I don't know. Kind of interesting cards. I think Garland of all these may be like a decent enabler for sort of graveyard strategies and a sort of payoff for graveyard strategies. So that one I think has some chance of seeing play in constructed. So I wouldn't be surprised if that had some synergies. Red black has graveyard synergies and stuff like that. So definitely, I think it has the most power of the cards. But let me know in the comments below what you think about all these different cards from Final Fantasy Magic. Is it weird? Is it cool? I'm kind of enjoying actually the flavor and the set so far. It seems like there's some powerful stuff going on. Really appreciate you watching. I don't know why the thank you looks like that. I'll just go back here. Um, Thanks so much. Appreciate you watching. If you want to support the channel, you can like, you can comment, subscribe, you can donate by giving a super thanks to the channel. Yeah, really appreciate you watching. Hope you're enjoying spoilers. And I'm going to come out with a bunch new decks. Of course, we'll be playing with Final Fantasy combos when these release, but got Aether Drift combos on the channel currently and in the future as well. So hope you enjoyed the content. Again, thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video.